millions of people remember the first time they heard Rush.
Chris, glad you called. You're next on the Rush Limbaugh program.
None of us had heard anything like that.
Here's this guy on the radio having fun, more fun than a human being is allowed to have.
So many uptight liberals have so much trouble figuring out what's happening here.
He believed in an idea that liberty, freedom, and conservative values would always win the day.
There was nobody telling me what I could not say on the radio, and there was nobody telling me what I had to say.
This talk show host is the angel of deliverance for America's raging right, and he doesn't care if you like it or not.
The thing about me is I am damn sure of myself. I don't sit on the radio and say, I think that it is. I sit on the radio and say, let me tell you the way it is.
Rush Limbaugh is a second-generation founding father, meaning he has had such an impact on American way of life.
It is your beliefs, it is your core principles, it is your confidence that liberates you.
He always believed America was that shining city on the hill, the greatest country God ever gave man.
Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country.
He helped drive conservative values in America. One man, one brain, one voice, for more than 30 years.
In 1951, America was introduced to I Love Lucy. Ike was being drafted for a presidential run, and Bobby Thompson hit the shot heard round the world. And in the small Missouri town of Cape Girardeau came the beginning of another great American story, with the birth of Rush Hudson Limbaugh III.
I come from a very conservative and very Republican family. I have to say today that I'm probably more conservative than I am Republican.
Rush Hudson Limbaugh I was a well-known jurist and a legislator in Missouri. Rush II was also a well-connected lawyer in the Show Me State.
My father was instrumental in getting Richard Nixon into Cape Girardeau in 1956 for a little parade, and I was 5 years old. I can remember the details of the Kennedy-Nixon campaign. It was that important in our house, and I can remember things my father said about it during that period of time. My dad took us to, my brother and I, to a Goldwater whistle stop, a train whistle stop over someplace in southern Illinois. We had to get up at 5 in the morning to get over there, and it was exciting.
But what really excited young Rusty, that's what his friends and family called him, was radio. He fondly recalls as a kid getting a set that let him broadcast throughout his house.
I knew I wanted to do radio when I was 12 because I hated school. And getting ready for school every morning, my mother had the radio on. And that guy was having fun. And I was having drudgery.
Rush loved football. He made the high school football team as a sophomore, but only played 1 year. His bigger love was radio, and he landed his first job in the industry before he graduated, a disc jockey, spinning rock and roll records under the name Rusty Sharp.
I remember my first radio station I worked at in my hometown of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. That was 1967 when I started.
Meantime, the Vietnam War escalated. And while his father was a pilot who flew P-51s in Burma during World War II, Rush never served overseas. After finishing high school in 1969, Rush had a short stint at Southwest Missouri State College before dropping out. But as the 1970s arrived, his only focus was to get back to the mic.
I loved music. I wanted to be a DJ. I would find my passion, and whatever it was, wild horses couldn't stop me. And I'd find a way to get paid doing it, which is essentially what I did.
His radio name? Bachelor Jeff Christie.
903 and 14K on the award-winning Jeff Christie Rock and Roll Radio Show. With fun and frolic for all. Some of you no doubt still wondering what award I have won. I'll tell you, none other than the Marconi Award for Excellence in Broadcasting.
All I ever did was stay dedicated to my desires. And I didn't have $5,000 when I was 18. Didn't have anything.
And also, Jeff, I will send you 2 6-packs of Carefree Sugarless Gum. You can chew it all day. And that'll entitle you to 12 more entries for you in the Carefree Rock Concert Contest. That's a tongue twister. Keep listening to the Jeff Christie Stardust Jockey Show.
Aliases were common in radio back then because the whole emphasis was on the personality of the person behind the microphone, not in trying to make them into a big celebrity themselves. But Rush, of course, wanted to push the envelope. Rush always had opinions.
If Rush had strong political opinions back then, he kept them out of his show. But another big personality was starting to bring conservative commentary to the AM dial.
This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening.
After a career in Hollywood and 2 terms as California governor, Ronald Reagan returned to his first job, radio, with a daily commentary that ran on 300 stations and reached 20 million Americans a week.
Reagan came along, those commentaries came in on record, the vinyl, 33, 45, or I think there were LPs.
Every once in a while, all of us native-born Americans should make it a point to have a conversation with one who is an American by choice. It can do a lot to strengthen our resolve to be free for another 200 years.
I listened to a couple of them now and then, and I was just struck by how persuasive, forceful, but unthreatening Reagan was.
But it would be another decade before Limbaugh would try his hand at political commentary. He learned it was hard enough to keep a job as a conventional radio personality.
I do think that Rush understood, after a couple of years in radio, that everybody gets fired in radio all the time. And not just for opinions, but just because the station manager doesn't like you or whether you came in 5 minutes late that day. I just think he was looking for the right place which would recognize his talents and give him a platform.
By the early 1980s, he decided to leave the radio business altogether.
I think part of Rush's success, in my humble opinion, is that he was not born into success. He talked about bouncing around from station to station. He knew what it was like to barely make his bills.
Rush landed a job in the Kansas City Royals ticket sales department. Reagan was president, and he admired the Gipper, but politics wasn't Rush's bag. Not yet.
I've always been conservative, and I've always known I've had conservative instincts, but it wasn't until I got old enough to understand what my father was saying that I understood why.
The great communicators, domestic and foreign policy successes helped clarify Limbaugh's thinking. And so did an aggressive backbencher in the House of Representatives, who found his own way to bypass the mainstream media and communicate directly with conservatives.
Let me track my knowledge, my becoming aware of Newt Gingrich for you. It's the early 80s, and the Democrats and the media are just creaming Reagan every day. Personally, his ideas, his policies. And I'd go home when I had a night free and I'd watch C-SPAN. And there was this guy doing special orders. He and a couple of his associates were speaking to an empty House chamber, but as long as somebody was in there speaking, C-SPAN had to cover it. This guy was Ronald Reagan, Jr. from the standpoint of substance, energy, and his ability to communicate ideas. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting revved up just watching this. And then I became exposed to Bill Buckley and his writings, and that enabled me to be persuasive with other people and explain to them why conservatism should triumph and is a better way to live and a better way to organize their affairs than liberalism.
He yearned to go back in front of the mic, and when that opportunity developed, Rush jumped at it.
Rush left the Royals, aiming to create a new kind of political opinion broadcast, one with the same raucous energy of a top 40 show, and at the center of it all, the host, a larger-than-life version of Rush himself.
I'd been a DJ for most of my radio career. I had dabbled in some talk, but I'd never done a real talk show until 1984 in Sacramento. I wanted to find out if I could be the reason people would listen to radio. Not guests, not authors, not other people, not singers, recording art. I wanted to find out if I could be the reason. And I got lucky. I found a radio station that would let me in Sacramento.
And Rush had a very different approach to the show. He, unlike other talk show hosts, didn't want guests. He didn't want experts. He really wanted to be the substance of the show. He brought all his own material to the show.
And Sacramento was a booming community back in the 1980s. It was obviously the state capital, so it had an audience that was interested in politics and was savvy about it. Also, California is a place where fresh talent can easily find its footing. And I think it was the perfect launching pad for Rush's later career.
But Rush would quickly realize the Federal Communications Commission was standing in the way of his vision. The problem? The so-called fairness doctrine.
Well, the fairness doctrine is what prevails in one form or another in most other countries to this day, which means that if you do 10 minutes with somebody on the right, you've got to do 10 minutes with somebody on the left.
My job is to get an audience. You don't get an audience with amateurs. You don't get an audience with people who have a single issue, who just want to get on the air and bore people to this. I got this guy coming in. I have to have him in there. I have to have him in there for an hour. I cannot really interrupt him. I can talk to him, but I can't debate him because he's got to get his time. It was the most boring radio show I have ever done. But we had to do it in order to get the license approved.
But in 1987, President Reagan's Federal Communications Commission repealed the fairness doctrine.
When Ronald Reagan bravely decided to get rid of the fairness doctrine, that opened up a whole new competitive playing field. And that opportunity is what gave Rush his opening.
And I think people didn't know what to make of him. They thought, is this guy a talk show host? Is he a political commentator? Is he an entertainer? All of the above. He espoused traditional conservative views in a very untraditional manner.
I remember when I first heard about Rush, I was in a radio studio and somebody asked me if I ever heard of Rush Limbaugh. I said, no, who's Rush Limbaugh? And told me, oh, you got to listen to this guy. He's hilarious, he's smart, he's conservative, he's funny. And then I became a fan. I had just started my radio journey a year earlier. And I think all of us probably, if you could think right now, where were you when you first heard of Rush Limbaugh?
There was nobody telling me what I could not say on the radio, and there was nobody telling me what I had to say. You know, it's my show. I'm the arbiter. I'm the boss.
When he was in Northern California broadcasting in Sacramento, he was getting a lot of attention. And a lot of that was because of the chances that he took when he was live on the air. That attention is what got him to New York City.
The fourth branch of government. Rush Limbaugh with talent on loan from God.
In August of 1988, The Rush Limbaugh Show, now nationally syndicated, premiered on the airwaves of America.
The Rush Limbaugh program kicking off a full week of broadcast excellence as we originate to you from our home base of AM 77 WABC in New York.
He's unique as his name. You think of Rush, you know exactly what you're talking about, a unique talent.
And am I out to reshape America so that everybody out there does what I want them to do? I'm not unrealistic to think that I can do that. I do joke around and say I'm not going away till every American agrees with me.
His 3-hour radio show was a revelation for listeners who'd never heard this type of radio before.
Today, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, I obliterated again the myth of the homeless advocacy and pointed out some of the hypocrisy and even near fraud that exists in that movement.
Just remember, he's generating all of those ideas from his own head. And I think it's just, it's a reflection of his curiosity and his intellect. And if you put all of that together with the desire to do your homework, you're going to find yourself with a winning combination.
There was, after all, a presidential election, the collapse of communism, and war in the Middle East.
And of course, that was a good opportunity to sound out against, a comical candidate like Michael Dukakis, who was the opponent of George H.W. Bush. And then in '89, you had all kinds of news, including the collapse of communism. What a great news template to write on. And then, of course, in 1990, you had the controversy about President Bush raising taxes. You had the invasion of Kuwait. And then in 1991, you had the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Gulf War. So there was a lot going on.
By 1991, the Rush Limbaugh Show would reach nearly 5 million listeners a week.
Limbaugh knows there's an audience on the other side, and the audience is looking for information. They're looking to be informed clearly, and they want to be entertained. He knows what his obligation is to his audience, and he fulfills that. 15 hours a week. And that's a massive amount of content for any one person to do.
I was the only national conservative entity in media. The other conservative talk shows were still local. They hadn't gone national yet. We really just had CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, the newspapers, and me.
And Rush, starting in about 1990, was finding his audience. And you were hearing reports of Rush rooms, people turning up the radio during lunch in various diners and other places, and people coming in and listening together like a communal listening experience. That was something completely new in radio broadcasting.
Rush struck a chord with an audience looking for a different viewpoint.
Rush was irreverent. Rush said what people thought, but in polite society would never say. But he said what people were thinking.
He articulates a lot of the positions that the traditional conservative Americans hold, and you just don't hear that on World News Tonight.
Rush, however, surprised many by how different he was off the air.
He was from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He never lost touch with his background, his roots, that flyover country that he often talked about. And that was the magic of Rush.
People always ask me, if they met Rush, what would be the most surprising thing? And I would have to say it would be that Rush is genuinely shy with a lot of people that he would meet privately. There's not this outrageous, bombastic ego that fills a room.
Even though he pretends to be arrogant and pretends to be pompous, he's actually just the opposite.
I'm dangerous because I am right and correct, and I'm having a good time being right.
He has very fixed views on how to reach his audience and how to keep them there, but he's really a shy person who comes alive in front of the microphone in a truly bigger-than-life sense. He's not really that way and would surprise many people that he isn't in private.
Even as a leading conservative voice, there was another opinion maker Rush looked up to, someone who inspired his political thinking in his early days as a disc jockey.
I start my radio show in 1988, and I get to New York to start it, and I'm singing my praises and my love and devotion for Bill Buckley and National Review on the radio. And I get a call, I don't remember the year, 1990, 91, 3 years later, from Francis Bronson, Mr. Buckley's assistant, inviting me to an editor's dinner at his home on Park Avenue in Manhattan. Just shaking. And I drove around the block twice before I had the courage to go in. And I got in there, and they all welcomed me with open arms. They made me feel like I was one of them. They were not threatened by my popularity, personally or professionally. They were happy to have a new member, prominent voice, articulating their beliefs.
With talent, so much talent, more than I'll ever need. On loan from God, Rush Limbaugh. Here on the Excellence in Broadcasting Network.
He was communicating with the audience. Audience members could call in. They got into a dialogue with Rush Limbaugh. They became part of the program.
Tampa, Florida. Chris, glad you called. You're next on the Rush Limbaugh program.
They became known as ditto heads because they often agreed with what Rush had said. And that had never really been tried before on this scale.
There's nobody that has control over it. So I had total freedom to be honest about anything I wanted to talk about. And that's precious.
The show, airing from 12 to 3 Eastern Time, dominated the lunch hour ratings.
At the time, there were less than 200 talk radio stations in the entire country. There are now over 4,000 stations. It is by far the #1 format in all of radio, a phenomenon in and of itself. And, he did something that nobody thought that you could do, and that is have a successfully syndicated radio show during the daytime.
But Limbaugh's convention-bending ways did have its critics.
This talk show host is the angel of deliverance for America's raging right, and he doesn't care if you like it or not.
She's just playing a little hard to get, folks. That's part of the traditional role of male-female relationships in America, and they said that song promotes date rape. It does not.
With Rush Limbaugh, you know right away what you're dealing with. A caveman from the dinosaur era. An adorable guy but a caveman.
I'm not a bigot. I don't hate anybody. I'm not a racist or any of that stuff. But people who've never heard me, who are liberals, believe that I'm all of those things because my critics write that garbage about me.
Rush has said, too, he was never called a racist anywhere in his life before he started becoming successful on the radio and espoused conservative views. So I know it had to make him feel uncomfortable for the first time it happened, but then he learned how to adapt to the criticism in the media, of course, and he just kept moving on.
This was a man that was incredibly brave and courageous and was willing to speak his mind in spite of so many voices that wanted to silence him.
The thing about me is I am damn sure of myself. I don't sit on the radio and say, I think that I sit on the radio and say, let me tell you the way it is.
Regardless of the opposition to Limbaugh, Rush was not just gaining audience members, he was also gaining influence.
He was able to communicate very effectively his beliefs on conservatism, his beliefs on the culture, and his mind was just amazing. He could absorb information, more information than I think any other person in our industry could. In fact, he had a phrase he used to say, life is show prep. And so he was always looking for something to bring to the show, something he found interesting. He revolutionized not only the talk radio business, but all of media.
For those who wanted more Limbaugh, they followed him to filled arenas on his Rush to Excellence tour.
Thank you! Thank you!
By 1992, the Rush Limbaugh Show had nearly 12 million listeners a week, and the shy boy from Missouri was now a major political player.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us to start today's program the President of the United States.
Most people see him as a talk show host. I see him as a newsman in the following way. He helped drive policy, conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican, by the force of his personality and by the influence of his program.
It is my conviction that the people of this country are not eager to be led by Governor Clinton, that his lead is not due to the fact that people are rabidly eager for him to be president.
And when Bush lost to Clinton, Rush became the focal point for a lot of attention. Who's going to speak out against Bill Clinton? Who's going to challenge his policies?
A lot of observers were thinking that, well, this might be a difficult period for Limbaugh to react. I think Rush had very different ideas.
Conservatives believe in liberty. Conservatives believe in freedom. And in terms of what the conservative agenda is, I think you can state it pretty simply. Liberty, freedom, start there. These are not complicated things. These are the things that Rush talked about every day. And he had fun doing it.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
In 1993, Bill Clinton was sworn in as president and became America's leading Democrat. Meanwhile, the conservative movement had a leader of its own, Rush Limbaugh.
When Bill Clinton takes power, he had a nemesis, and that was Rush Limbaugh, who would talk, not read, on a daily basis, in depth, and give opinion about the Clinton policies.
President Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton's promotion of universal health care reform was a driving force for Limbaugh throughout the president's first few months in office.
He was able to take the human element and the problems that Clinton had and the bad decisions he actually made and put it towards what the country was going through.
And it is there that so many uptight liberals have so much trouble figuring out what's happening here.
Within about 4 or 5 months of Clinton taking office, National Review magazine, where I currently work, had a cover story, and it showed Rush as one of the founding fathers.
And Clinton's scandals, including a sexual harassment lawsuit by an Arkansas woman named Paula Jones, and his possible involvement in a questionable real estate deal called Whitewater, only gave Rush Limbaugh more ammunition.
When Bill Clinton became president, given all his outside personality, the scandals, the women and all of that, I mean, that really did help boost Rush Limbaugh into the stratosphere.
As a bona fide conservative star, Limbaugh expanded his brand into other parts of the media universe.
Rush's success gave him tremendous opportunities to reach people who weren't just radio listeners. Rush, of course, did books, which is old media, but he also did an internet website where you could sign up and listen to Rush if you couldn't hear him live. That was unprecedented among radio personalities back then. And you could also subscribe to his newsletter, which came out once a month and was a big bestseller in terms of hundreds of thousands of subscribers.
He also stepped in front of the camera with his own syndicated television show.
He became a multimedia star. I mean, bigger than life.
While Rush Limbaugh's profile continued to increase, so too did his detractors.
Your critics always use key words when they describe you. The words that you actually have used, feminazi, tree huggers, when you're talking about those people concerned about the environment. What does feminazi mean?
I happen to be pro-life. And I do believe that there are a very few militant feminists who have attached a political agenda to abortion. And the closest term I can come up to equate with slaughter and Holocaust is Nazi, so feminazi.
One thing about Rush is you either love every one of his 259 pounds or you hate his guts.
In the early days, Rush Limbaugh even got a contract to endorse orange juice in Florida. For some reason, the person that offered the contract did not realize the hatred that he generates from people who don't agree with him. And of course, once he got that deal, there was all sorts of protests.
Flush Rush now! To the chance of flush Rush, gay rights activists poured Florida orange juice down the sewer, kicking off a week-long nationwide boycott of the product. The activists are angry with the Florida Citrus Commission for paying conservative commentator Rush Limbaugh $1 million to promote orange juice on his radio show.
I think those who, let's say those who do not look fondly on him, you could call them the Limbaugh haters, I think what they fail to see oftentimes is this man has an amazing sense of humor.
Rush had fun. He was sarcastic when it fit. He was sardonic when that fit. He was just merciless with humor and with parodies on political topics.
And if you start to see that side of him, you'll see a different human being. You find a man who is gracious and giving and funny and smart and driven to be the absolute best there is.
Rush's audience continued to grow, with his daily radio show reaching an unprecedented 20 million listeners a week by 1994.
Stand by for Rush Limbaugh, America's most listened to talk radio program.
I thought this guy was endlessly interesting and insightful, but then it became clear that he was impactful.
Nowhere was that more apparent than the 1994 midterm congressional elections.
All of these Americans watching all the CBS, NBC, ABC news, reading the New York Times, Time Magazine, CNN, were sitting there furious at the news bias, at the unfairness, at the depiction of Reagan, at the depiction of Goldwater, the way all of the genuine people they loved and adored were portrayed in the media. I came along and validated it. Most people who were conservative did not have validation in the media for their ideas. Hollywood made fun of them, still does, in movies. Songs made fun of them, musicians and so forth. Here I come, and I simply validated what everybody else already felt. And so it inspired them. It gave them confidence. A lot of these guys listening to me decided to run for office.
The GOP hadn't controlled the House of Representatives for 4 decades. But after 2 years of President Clinton, House Minority Whip Newt Gingrich saw a chance to rock the political world in 1994.
When we were developing the Contract with America, nobody thought it was possible for Republicans to become a majority. And one of the real keys to that breakthrough was Rush Limbaugh, who was a cheerleader. He was helping define why the left was unacceptable. He was helping build public anger at the kind of policies that Clinton was following.
The contract with America was rooted in ideas, conservative ideas, 10 things, very simple, here's what we're going to do.
The Rush Limbaugh Show would become a popular outlet for Republican candidates hoping to take control of Congress.
He became a major political force, and politicians recognized that if they had Rush's support, that dramatically increases the odds that they were going to win.
That's when the left and the mainstream realized this guy is a serious threat. All the people we pay no attention to, guys driving around in their pickup trucks that we never give a moment's thought to, they're all tuned to this guy. And for the first time in a couple of generations, there's enough of them seriously to put the Democrats in the minority.
It was the most dramatic change in the Congress in 40 years. Republicans won control of both the Senate and the House.
It's a knockout.
The morning after, Republicans were ecstatic.
It was a takedown, it was a slam dunk, it was a tidal wave, whatever moniker you want to put on it, this was and is history, big time.
The Republicans won back both the House and the Senate for the first time since 1953. To show their gratitude, congressional Republicans named Rush an honorary member of the freshman class of 1994.
I was exalted that it happened. And the reason it happened, I mean, the reason why the freshman class of that House of Representatives that gave me an honorary membership is that many of the people, many of the members of Congress that won election as freshmen were listeners to my program starting in 1988. They had been motivated and inspired to run for office. See, people think that I came along and created a nation of mind-numb robots, that I had some sort of magical Svengali power, and that people were just glued like idiots with nothing but a sponge for a brain listening to me. And that's the exact opposite of what happened.
Rush Limbaugh played a massive, massive role in the Republicans regaining Congress in 1994. He's the one who shaped them, who whipped them up. You take away Rush Limbaugh, I'm not sure that it all would have happened. He was a major, major player in that whole period of time.
Despite the GOP takeover, some Republicans were worried about the direction of the party.
I was invited to my first dinner party in the Hamptons in the 90s. And I went out there, and it was all these kinds of Republicans. I was really the lone conservative. This was during the Clinton years. And I was the lone real conservative there. And I was, even in that group, I was somewhat of a circus act. Well, look, we got Mr. Limbaugh here, this hot shot on the radio. And after dinner, out on the deck, one of these guys came up to me and actually poked me in the chest and said, "What are you going to do about the Christians?" I said, what do you mean? They're killing us. Abortion is killing us. We're never going to win diddly squat unless we get rid of the social issues. Now, this is the mid-90s. And I looked at this guy, and I said, "What are you talking to me for about this?" "Well, they listen to you. If you tell them to change their mind or give it up, they'll..." I said, "Pal, you won't win another election without them. There are 24 million of them, supposedly conservative Christians. What do you mean, lose election? You lost elections every year. You didn't run the House for 40 years. You guys don't know how to win diddly squat."
Less than 1 year after being sworn in, the newly elected Republicans in Congress were dealt a major public relations blow after a highly politicized showdown between Bill Clinton and Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich ended with the government shutting down in November of 1995.
The Republicans lost the PR battle. The government shutdown was engineered between Bill Clinton and the Government Workers Union. They were promised their Thanksgiving turkeys. They were promised all these things when the government shut down. The government shutdown happened. Republicans portrayed as heartless and uncaring, when in fact the first year they had done great work in balancing the budget and getting started on more responsibility in government. And then something about being in that town, it's why I refuse to live in Washington. I think it's a town that's politically and socially run by Democrats and by the left. And you just apparently get caught up in wanting to survive there and wanting to get along there. And getting along means getting along with the people who run the show, media, Democrats, and so forth. So you end up, some people just end up being compromised, and they, instead of articulating principled conservative views, they seek credibility not from the people who elected them, They seek credibility from their critics in Washington.
In 1996, following an 8-year run with WABC in New York, Rush Limbaugh moved his show down south, but he stayed on top, attracting more than 20 million listeners each week. And his audience was about to grow even more, thanks in part to a new scandal from the recently re-elected President Bill Clinton.
Clinton begins to gain popularity. Something else happened. A Whitewater investigation ended up falling into and kind of stumbling into a White House affair with an intern.
In 1998, President Clinton's affair with a White House intern named Monica Lewinsky came to light.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
And as this happened, as it began to develop, Rush Limbaugh would see this story and be able to stay ahead of the story, where people had to listen to find out what's next.
All of us in talk radio, of course, covered the story, including Rush Limbaugh, and of course, he's got a much, much bigger audience. He, I think, helped to drive the impeachment of Bill Clinton.
Clinton was acquitted, but he remained a popular president, prompting some Republicans to say impeaching him was a mistake.
Clinton lied under oath to a federal judge, and he suborned perjury. If you go talk to most people, they think the Republicans tried to impeach Clinton because of the affair, not because he lied under oath, lost his law license for a year and so forth. It wasn't the wrong thing to do. I don't view the revisionist look at this as a mistake. A lot of people do, but I'm not one to apologize for legitimate efforts that were undertaken. I might acknowledge mistakes were made in how they were carried out. But I don't think, did it hurt conservatism? I don't think it was a conservative thing to do, per se. It was tied to conservatives, but this was a legal matter that was defined in the Constitution, explained in the Constitution. So there's no question that there was fallout from it that was negative. But look, that's then. It happened, and you can't change it.
Back in the day, Rush doubters wondered how he'd survive without a friendly administration in the White House. And after 8 years of President Clinton, the skeptics asked, what would Rush do now without his favorite target in the White House?
There are variations of that question that I've always gotten. Okay, when Clinton leaves office, what are you going to talk about? Now that impeachment's over, what are you going to talk about? And I've always said that my success is not determined by who wins elections. It's not determined by what public policy positions triumph. So my theory of a radio program is give people a good show that's entertaining and informative, and they'll listen to it. And politicians and newsmakers pass from the public scene, and they're replaced by others. But as long as there are a sufficient number of liberals attempting to influence American culture, I'm always going to have a show.
But in fact, Rush was dealing with personal problems. Since at least 1996, he'd been abusing pain medicine originally prescribed after back surgery. His years-long struggle with addiction threatened to derail his career in ways his political critics never could.
I did fear that his career might very well have been over.
On September 11, 2001, the United States, which had seemed hopelessly divided for the better part of a generation, was drawn together in a new fight against a common foe. Rush Limbaugh immediately saw radical Islamic terrorism as an enemy that needed to be vanquished on the battlefield, the way his father's generation dealt with the Axis powers, in World War II fashion.
Whoever is targeting the freedom and the well-being of Americans is going to be my enemy. Whether they exist in the United States, or whether they're in caves in Afghanistan, or whether they're taking over businesses in Venezuela, or whether they're building Hummers in China. If they are an enemy of freedom and the security of the United States, they're an enemy.
However, while the world was turned upside down by terrorism, Rush's personal life and potentially his career were being thrown into disarray. On October 9th, 2 days after the start of the war in Afghanistan, Rush told his audience he was going deaf. According to Rush, the diagnosis was autoimmune inner ear disease.
For all clinical practical purposes, if I take the right side hearing aid out, I do not hear a single thing. Zip, zero.
He's in the radio business, and he takes calls from listeners, and he can no longer hear what they're saying. There was a part of Rush that was always an old school disc jockey. That's one reason why he's better than so many others, because he reacts to the music and he bounces off the music. And it's a tragedy that he can no longer hear that music.
When you're met with that health condition, I think for most people it would be fatal in terms of whether or not they can continue to do the job that they had done before.
Limbaugh, however, found a way. First, by hiring a court reporter to provide him a simultaneous transcript of listener calls, and then by undergoing surgery for a hearing implant. He temporarily handed his show over to guest hosts. But by January 2002, the most listened to radio show host in America was back on the air.
The way Rush did it was by seeking the best medical advice possible. And he did his homework to figure out, what are my options? What can I do? How do I save my livelihood?
Rush performed flawlessly. His timing, his delivery was amazingly precise. This man was born to do what he did. He was a genius at it. He was a first-level performer. And he performed brilliantly without being able to hear a thing. And then after the cochlear implants, of course, he was able to continue his career.
The show must go on. And when it finally went public and he went and sought medical treatment, there was this incredible outpouring of support from fans.
I even interviewed him during that time, almost as if nothing had happened, and that was a testament to the franchise that he had created.
That franchise eventually led Limbaugh, an avid football fan, to be hired as an analyst for ESPN's NFL coverage in the fall of 2003, which he did in addition to his daily radio show. But the outspoken Rush would soon find himself in hot water.
I remember during the ESPN time when Rush Limbaugh was a co-host, and he made a comment that was deemed to be disparaging about Donovan McNabb. And all he said was that there was a lot of pull, of pressure, of desire for Donovan McNabb to succeed because he was black.
I don't think he's been that good from the get-go. I think what we've had here is a little social concern in the NFL. I think the media has been very desirous that a black quarterback do well.
Rush resigned from ESPN after only 4 weeks at the network.
By the next day, he was out of a job, and people realized that he's an audience for people that understand him, but in the mainstream, people fear him to a degree, and they want to destroy him. It's pretty clear that the media and Democrats in particular want to destroy what they can't control. That was an opportunity to try to destroy Rush.
As the critics came for Limbaugh's head, Rush was bloodied but unbowed, willing to take on his detractors.
I'm not going to sit here and apologize or regret anything I said, because A, I was right. B, I've got people now who agree not only was I right, but that what was said was not anything that needs to be apologized for.
Rush said something that was controversial. It involved race in one way or another, and that's, the third rail of American politics and American political correctness.
And for that reason, he was deemed to be racist. It was so incredibly unfair. That's because half the country does not want to hear another thoughtful opinion. That's how these guys roll.
But it turns out at precisely the same time, Rush was dealing with an even bigger PR problem, a personal crisis. It exploded in the press just 1 week after the ESPN episode.
I need to tell you today that part of what you have heard and read in the past week is correct. I am addicted to prescription pain medication. Immediately following this broadcast, I will check myself into a treatment center for the next 30 days to once and for all break the hold that this highly addictive medication has on me.
As Rush stepped away from the mic, news outlets noting a link between some pain medicines and hearing loss questioned whether Rush's addiction had caused his deafness. but his doctor insisted that nobody knew if the two were related. After 5 weeks away, Limbaugh returned to the microphone in November of 2003.
Millions of so-called ditto heads will hear their main man back on the air tomorrow, that being Monday. A conservative talker, Rush Limbaugh, said to be back on the air tomorrow after spending several weeks at a drug rehab.
I think the reason he got through it is because the desire that he has, knowing that he has millions and millions of people on a daily basis who wanted to keep hearing from him. And I think that's shows a lot of personal strength to push through both of those very public and personal events.
I wasn't good enough, or I was masking unhappiness elsewhere, not dealing with the real reasons I was unhappy in my personal life. I had never experienced the kind of euphoria that I got from a pain pill. I think the only time that I really, with all the success I've had, the only time I've had that kind of euphoria was when I made the high school football team as a sophomore. I was never prouder of myself, but all my career achievements did not create that for me, because you got to maintain it every day. It's not something you earn and then it lasts forever. And I don't look back. I don't stop and think about what I've accomplished, because there's always tomorrow. So I don't have time for the euphoria.
Rush demonstrated that when, at the very darkest hour of his life, and something that was profoundly damaging, at least had the potential to be profoundly damaging to his public image, he dealt with it all with perfect honesty. The connection between him and his audience is based on the fact that he talks the truth. He's perfectly upfront and he's perfectly authentic.
So the pain pills came along and they masked all these feelings of inadequacy that I had. Now, after just 7 weeks of this place in Arizona, I have zero feelings of inadequacy. It's not been replaced by an irresponsible ego. It's just a confidence in who I am.
Through it all, Limbaugh's show remained #1, broadcasting from his home base in South Florida. When Rush wasn't on the air, he enjoyed the amenities of the good life, like playing golf and smoking a good cigar. By 2005, the conservative radio market that had been pioneered by Rush Limbaugh only continued to grow.
And one of the things that makes me happiest and proudest is that the talk radio venue, the whole market has expanded. There are all kinds of people doing it now. Then the successful ones are conservative. And yet the pie has gotten bigger.
There's not a single person on air on talk radio today that doesn't owe a debt of gratitude to Rush. Trailblazer, forged the path. We were all the beneficiaries of it.
He didn't care who came along. As the years went by, there were people who were 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years younger than him doing this thing, and he was completely secure about it.
But though conservative talk radio was rising, conservatives in Washington were falling. With voters unhappy about the response to Hurricane Katrina and the stalled war on terror, Democrats took back the House in 2006.
During the time when Nancy Pelosi became Speaker, the time when George W. Bush was being hammered for the Iraq War was going south. At one time, I think a lot of people tuned in to people like Rush Limbaugh because it was a safe haven where they could get fair and balanced coverage without their side being demeaned and being hammered.
You know, we all want the same things, and we all want prosperity, we all want liberty and freedom, we all want a great future for our kids, educational opportunities, but there are huge arguments over how to bring it about. People like me believe in the free market, capitalism, freedom, people working their own self-interest. The Democrats don't trust individuals to make the right decisions for themselves. They need people to be in a state of need, because that's how liberals derive their power. So they look at average Americans with contempt.
I think Rush always would explain to his listening audience, Republican Party, Democratic Party, they go through ups and downs, but the principles of the founding fathers, of conservatism, of faith, continue, and their time will rise again.
And Rush Limbaugh was ready to be the messenger of the conservative movement in the build-up to the 2008 Democratic primaries, enjoying his role as a chief critic to a familiar foe from the past and a new kind of liberal hoping to take over the Democratic Party.
It is our best chance to create millions of new jobs.
As Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton traded barbs throughout the primary campaign, Rush remained the go-to source for those who thought the media wasn't giving them the whole story about the favorites for the Democratic nomination.
Rush would dissect their ideas, which were equally crazy, equally liberal, equally fiscally bankrupt, and equally dangerous to America's standing in the world. And because the media abandoned its job during that election, Rush had a field day.
Rush Limbaugh pointed out that they were both tax, spend, regulate Democrats whose foreign policy is strength through peace as opposed to peace through strength, and we need to fight that. And he predicted that government would get bigger and bigger if either of those two became president, and that's exactly what happened.
The United States. To preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The 2008 campaign would become a gut check for conservatives and left Rush Limbaugh and others convinced it would take a return to the conservatism of old to bring Republicans back to power in the White House.
Liberalism can't sell itself with its ideas. They have to mask what they believe, and they have to come up with demagogic, cult-like figures to really, like Obama, to sell it. So I think conservatism expands and grows, and it's more solid now than people realize. We just haven't had a candidate that is conservative. Had we had a candidate that was genuinely Reagan-esque running against Obama, we would have won that election.
Within days of Obama's inauguration, Rush sparked a backlash with his comments on the new president.
I don't need 400 words, I need 4. I hope he fails.
It's one thing to say if somebody is your ideological opponent, I hope that they fail because you're trying to stop their ideology. It's nothing to say that you want the president, and in terms of the country, you don't necessarily want the country to fail. And the Rush knew that.
You can't say, Mr. Limbaugh, that you want the president to fail, because that's like saying you want the country to fail. No, it's the opposite. I want the country to survive. I want the country to succeed.
And Rush was on the president's mind. Obama made Limbaugh the personification of the opposition to his plans for $1 trillion stimulus, bailouts, and a massive health insurance bill that came to be known as Obamacare. Shortly after taking office, the president told Republican lawmakers in a closed-door meeting, "You can't just listen to Rush Limbaugh and get things done."
Some of the underlying issues that have led to
President Obama, instead of saying, hey, I beat John McCain and I'm a historic figure, the first thing he does is identify Rush Limbaugh as the enemy. And in a way, it's the ultimate compliment, saying there's a guy behind a microphone who has me more intimidated than anything else. And I think that says everything.
If Obama was going to appoint Limbaugh his chief political rival, Rush was up for the job. He didn't make a lot of public appearances, but in February of 2009, he agreed to speak at the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, delivering a speech that many called a conservative State of the Union address.
Let me tell you who we conservatives are. We love people. When we look out over the United States of America, when we are anywhere, when we see a group of people such as this or anywhere, we see Americans.
The great trend of this, really the last 20 years or so, has been the marginalization of the right from mainstream discourse. And the fact that Rush was there every day with the #1 show in America is he was the principal opposition to the total marginalization of conservatism and conservative ideas.
We want every American to be the best he or she chooses to be. We recognize that we are all individuals. We love and revere our founding documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, freedom. And the pursuit of happiness.
Rush's passionate speech ignited conservatives once again, and millions continued to listen to Limbaugh's daily radio show for insight in the early days of the Obama presidency.
We've never seen this kind of radical leadership at such a high level of power in the country. I believe that the economy is under siege, is being destroyed. Anybody with any economic literacy would not do one thing this administration has done to try to revitalize the private sector. They're destroying it.
By 2010, a new right was rising. They called themselves the Tea Party and opposed runaway government spending and especially Obamacare.
We elected those people to serve us, and they're not doing that. They're serving themselves.
People are furious about this. They feel like they weren't listened to, and what they want us to do is try to forget.
To me, there's no question, there's no Tea Party without Rush Limbaugh. It would become part of the news cycle. People would start protesting, bonding, having meetings.
The Tea Party started as a protest movement, and of course you can't miss a protest movement, people showing up at town hall meetings.
Rush was hammering away at the fact that the Obama economic plan was a disaster. It was making the rich richer. It was not helping small business. It was not helping average workers. The economy was not recovering, and people believed it.
The 2010 election allowed a new class of conservatives to take over as Republicans won back the House and made major gains in the Senate.
We've come to take our government back. The midterms go all Republicans' way. Rush Limbaugh and the Republicans were suddenly on a roll.
But then, once again, Rush became embroiled in controversy. He criticized a law student who stepped into the national spotlight during the Obamacare debate by publicly advocating for coverage of contraceptives.
So what does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute. She wants to be paid to have sex.
Sandra Fluke, who was a Georgetown student, was certainly a political activist and certainly a political player in this issue, but she was a young kid, more or less. And going after her was considered out of bounds and unfair because he attacked her in very personal terms. I think he was right to apologize for that.
It was simply for using inappropriate words in a way I never do. And in so doing, I became like the people we oppose. I ended up descending to their level.
Although Rush shed some advertisers, his reign at the top continued. Though his support for Mitt Romney wasn't enough to deny Barack Obama a second term.
Despite record-breaking debt and deficit numbers and some of the highest unemployment rates ever for an incumbent, Barack Obama easily won re-election as president Tuesday night.
The conservative movement seemed at a crossroads, but Rush Limbaugh pleaded with them to stay the course.
I mean, there's a battle for the party going on, and sure, it'd be a tough battle, but there's no other option. You don't want to go third party. That just ensures the Democrats are majority party forever. You don't want to do that, so you have to do what you can to work within the Republican Party to take it over.
Whomever becomes the Republican contenders will have a very high bar to leap. How to unite the Republican Party in the face of demographic shifts that increasingly favor the Democrats.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
Rush was pleased that the Republican establishment was finally being challenged, some of its basic tenets questioned about how working people are treated. But Rush also had some skepticism.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
In 2015, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump took the political world by storm.
Rush certainly knew Donald Trump and had been friendly with him. They were in New York together for, 10 years or so. And of course, Rush moved to Palm Beach, and that's where Mar-a-Lago is, so they also got to know each other there.
But there was a sense of skepticism for Rush, knowing that the man who was leading in the polls had not always been a Republican.
Donald Trump had been a Democrat until late 2009. He advocated all kinds of liberal ideas, including national health insurance in his early days. And Rush took a wait-and-see attitude with Donald Trump.
Trump promised big tax cuts. He issued a list of conservatives he'd nominate to the Supreme Court. And like Rush, he flouted political correctness at every turn. Trump won a string of primary victories in early 2016. And Rush Limbaugh signaled that he was open to supporting the businessman from New York for president.
I think as Trump gathered momentum and Rush could really feel his audience moving behind him, I think Rush thought, why is the Republican establishment trying to stop him? Shouldn't they listen to what he has to say?
Donald Trump has put together a coalition, whether he knows it or not, whether he intended to or not, he's put together a coalition that's exactly what the Republican Party says that it needs to win. And yet, look what they're doing. They're trying to get Trump out of the race because they're not in charge of it. They're not in control of it. And it's the most amazing thing to watch this happen.
Rush got behind the whole idea that the Trump train was moving, and if you wanted to see some measure of a conservative Republican agenda in America, you had to be on that train.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Even though I don't believe that they agreed on everything, the mutual respect between them was something to be seen.
I think he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And at the bottom line, I don't really think he's fazed by all of this. I know Donald Trump, he's a winner, he's committed, and he has intended all along to do what he thinks is necessary to save the country. And nobody can blow up that bond that Trump voters have. The Washington establishment to this day does not understand Donald Trump. They don't understand his voters, and they're not curious to find out why. They just resent it.
Rush Limbaugh would eventually become one of President Trump's biggest defenders, often echoing the president's themes of Make America Great Again and America First.
America First is based on the solution and the submission that America is the solution to the world's problems. It is not the problem. The left in America, the left around the world thinks America is the problem, and we're not. When America leads, when America triumphs, when America prospers, the world does greater than ever.
In 2018, Rush Limbaugh celebrated his 30th anniversary as a nationally syndicated radio talk show host.
I'm enjoying it as much as I ever have, if not more so. I get more thrills from it. I get more satisfaction from it than I've ever had.
He has single-handedly, in my view, kept AM radio and maybe talk radio in business. I don't think there could be a higher statement about anyone in any field that could be a higher compliment than to say, you're the one who kept this industry in business. You're the one who invented it. And you're the one who still, after 30 years, does it better than anyone else.
Number one, he earned it with his work. He earned it with his work ethic, and he earned it with an uncompromising professionalism.
If you would have told me 30 years ago, or even 40, when I was dreaming of all this, that by the time I reached 65, that it would be more competitive than ever, that I would be more involved than ever. I thought 65, well, you got left to prove. You phone it in, you take it easy, you go to the beach, do a couple hours a week, and that's it, like Johnny Carson did. I can't imagine not doing this.
But 2 years later, he'd be dealt staggering news. He shared it with his listeners on February 3rd, 2020.
It's a struggle for me because I had to inform my staff earlier today. I can't escape, even though people are telling me it's not the way to look at it. I can't help but feel that I'm letting everybody down with this. But the upshot is that I have been diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. Diagnosis confirmed by 2 medical institutions back on January 20th.
On the air, I heard in my earpiece, Bill, check your email. And I saw the alert, and they said, get ready, we're going to read this in 2 minutes. And that was the news of Rush's diagnosis.
I got some breaking news. I want to bring this to our viewers right now here. Fox News alert here from Des Moines. We're hearing the conservative American talk radio host Rush Limbaugh announcing he has advanced lung cancer.
That was a moment that I will not forget, and neither will the people who were around me on the set that day.
And I wish I didn't have to tell you this. And I thought about not telling anybody. I thought about trying to do this without anybody knowing, because I don't like making things about me. But there are going to be days that I'm not going to be able to be here because I'm undergoing treatment or I'm reacting to treatment.
After Rush's sobering announcement, support and prayers poured in from his listeners and friends across America.
Rush is a fighter. Tonight, all of us were praying that he gets the treatment that he's now getting and gets back to work as soon as possible, doing what he does better than anyone else, and that's fighting for this wonderful country of ours, our way of life, our core values, everything we all hold so dear.
And his friend in the White House decided it was time to recognize Rush Limbaugh for his contributions to the nation.
We flew from Des Moines, Iowa to Washington, D.C. for the State of the Union address. I found it to be a very special evening.
Almost every American family knows the pain when a loved one is diagnosed with a serious illness. Here tonight is a special man, beloved by millions of Americans, who just received a stage 4 advanced cancer diagnosis. This is not good news, but what is good news is that he is the greatest fighter and winner that you will ever meet. Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country.
He showed us, he taught us, he inspired us, he gave us direction. And we listened, and we learned, and we're better off because of it.
And Rush, in recognition of all that you have done for our nation, the millions of people a day that you speak to and that you inspire, and all of the incredible work that you have done for charity, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
What you need to see is the reaction on Rush's face when it was announced that he would receive that award. And from my perspective, that's about all we need to know about how Rush felt about that high, high honor as an American.
I will now ask the First Lady of the United States to present you with the honor, please.
So here he is dealing with his cancer, never as powerful and as impactful and influential as he was at that moment. At the same time, he knew, as important as that is, now he's in a fight for his life.
fight he did. As the world dealt with a crippling pandemic, and the country dealt with racial tensions amidst the backdrop of a presidential campaign, Rush Limbaugh continued his daily routine, broadcasting to millions of Americans, all while fighting cancer. On the day Americans headed to the polls, Rush Limbaugh gave his last television interview on Fox News Channel.
It's official. Election day is here. President Trump and Joe Biden making their final pitches to voters on the trail. Here it is, November 3rd, Election Day, and we have to make room for this radio personality called Rush Limbaugh. Really? He wants to call and he wants to talk.
I woke up this morning, and I thank God that I did. And I have had a very, very good fortune with the course of treatment that I've had, and I'm just thrilled to be here. Every day, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here and to be able to be part of this today. This was an objective.
Very grateful and impactful interview because he let it all go. Number one, Rush Limbaugh's like that. It's not like you're listening to a newscaster in the 1950s who just is delivering these words. Everything he said, he felt and believed.
I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for my family. They have, particularly my wife, who has just, this stuff is hard, but a lot of people have been through it, and you know. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but you know the sacrifice that the people closest to you make. And they don't get any help, they don't get any assistance, they just do what they have to do. And I have been the beneficiary of some of the most loving and devoted people. I mentioned at the outset of this, the first day I told you that I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It is of immense value, strength, confidence. And that's why I'm able to remain fully committed to the idea that what is supposed to happen will happen when it's meant to. There's some comfort in knowing that some things are not in our hands. There's a lot of fear associated with that too, but there is some comfort. It's helpful. God, it's helpful to be able to trust and to believe in a higher plan.
On February 17, 2021, after a year-long battle with lung cancer, Rush Hudson Limbaugh III passed away. He was 70 years old.
We begin tonight a Fox News alert. God, faith, family, country. This is what Rush Limbaugh embodied, and tens of millions of Americans listen. It's hard to even consider any major political issue of our time and not have Rush's take on it. And that's coming. We will notice that void. And what I've been saying to people, well, what it really means is, and what I think Rush would want for all of us, to stay in the fight. This was his life's mission.
William F. Buckley, who was the founder of the magazine where I work, National Review, once said that Rush was the continuation of the conservative message by other means. He built a fabulously successful broadcasting empire. He was obviously someone who delighted and impressed millions of listeners.
He is an American hero. He's an American icon. And I am so blessed that I had the opportunity to work with this man, to know the goodness of this man. It is one of the blessings that I hold most dear in my life.
There is no doubt that he helped drive conservative values in America. One man, one brain, one voice for more than 30 years. It did not matter whether a Republican was in the White House or a Democrat, whether Republicans controlled Congress or Democrats. Limbaugh was the constant through all of that political change.
This force of nature will be missed. He always believed America was that shining city on the hill, the greatest country God ever gave man, and that as Reagan said, we're only one generation away from extinction, and it's up to every generation to preserve, protect, and defend all the values that represented and inspired and Russia espoused every day. He'll be missed. Miss him dearly.
God is a profound factor. Jesus Christ, a profound factor. I just try to give thanks every day for all of the blessings. I have had a blessed life. I have had so many great friends. I have, and still do. There's nothing negative for me. There's nothing that I have deep regrets about because I've been too blessed.